Hi, welcome to Module 2 lecture, the first English colonies, about 1585 to 1676. So we are moving ahead in time and we are moving north away from New Spain into the English colonies on the eastern seaboard. Your learning objectives for this module are to understand the differences between Spanish and English colonization. We're also going to begin our discussion of the roots of racialized slavery, and we'll continue with that topic in later modules. I just want to stress that our goal here is not to say which form of colonization was better, which form was more or less devastating to Indigenous communities. We're really just trying to understand how they differed and how those differences led to different forms of labor, economic, and social and political structures in the two colonies. And your only other work for this module or for this lecture is the Module 2 exit exam. So we're going to stop briefly in New Spain to remind ourselves what Spanish colonization is like. Then we're going to scoot right around French claimed territories, sorry, France, and we're going to scoot right up here to the northeast and the eastern seaboard to focus on early English colonization. And our focus today is mostly going to be in the Chesapeake Bay region, especially Virginia. Of course, we're also going to be across the Atlantic Ocean so we can understand a little bit about what's going on in England at the time. So New Spain, then we'll head to England to see what the political, economic, and social situation in England is circa 1585. Then we'll come back, take a look at Jamestown in Virginia, and we're going to explore a couple of crises, conflicts with the Powhatan and other Native Americans, and we're going to end with a discussion of 1676 crisis in Virginia, Bacon's Rebellion. Okay, first, back to New Spain. You remember the 3 G's of Spanish colonization: gold, God, glory. Mission of conversion then was used as a justification for colonization, and church leadership was also instrumental in administering the colonies, particularly via the missions, you know, here in San Antonio, present day San Antonio. No, they called it San Antonio. You know that in San Antonio, Indigenous people came to the missions to escape the Apache. But once they're in the missions, the forced conversions and forced labor are what keeps the Spanish Empire and the New World running. Now, the Spanish weren't unique in these ideas of Christianity and Indigenous people. Most Europeans believed in the inherent superiority of their culture and societies over those of Native Americans. And most people didn't really question the right to conquer them. Rather, colonizers expected these societies to abandon their own cultures in favor of European culture, European religion, European social hierarchy, and more. And before colonizing the New World, Europeans had fought each other in religious wars and conflicts, establishing a precedent for conquering other people. You know that Spain was fresh off the Reconquista when they reclaimed or claimed some of Muslim Spain and ejected Spanish Jews as well. And you know that the Pope said that, hey, Spain and Portugal, you are responsible for spreading the Catholic faith in your dominions. And the Spanish in particular embraced that mission to convert natives to Christianity. All right. Now, you know that the Spanish used in their early 1500s colonization, you know that the Spanish used Indigenous people, enslaved them to extract silver and gold from these mines. It's good, okay. This practice continued even as Native American populations dwindled, but there were criticisms of this from some Catholic priests. Bartolomé de las Casas is one who really called out the Spanish for what they were doing. And he said, how can we convert people, which acknowledges they have souls just like us, they're children of God just like us? How can we convert them and enslave them? Most Europeans did not see a contradiction there. As long as you were saving souls, what happened to the body didn't matter. De las Casas says, no, we have to stop enslaving our fellow Christians. And that's usually where the De las Casas excerpt cuts off and everyone cheers for De las Casas. De las Casas wasn't, though, advocating for an end to slavery. He said, we have to stop enslaving indigenous people and instead we'll enslave people of African descent, that will import people from Africa and enslave them instead. So by the 1550s, New Spain was run by a complicated bureaucracy, all answering to the Spanish crown, with peninsulares or persons of Spanish birth atop that social hierarchy. But they were only a tiny portion of the population. Indigenous people always outnumbered European colonists in New Spain. Large areas remained effectively under the control of the indigenous people. The Spanish could not conquer the Apache, for instance. So Spanish authorities emphasized assimilation of indigenous people, not through just conversion, but through intermarriage as well. So remember, Spain's idea, let's create more Spain. Let's do it by Spaniards. Let's make people Spanish. We'll convert them to Christianity. And the Spanish men that go to the colonies will marry indigenous women and create more Spaniards that way. But we don't want to think or assume that that led to some sort of utopia of racial equality. Here we see an example of how new categories, new ideas about race are being created through the process of colonization. One of the things we want to keep in mind is that our ideas about race that might be ancient and never changing are really new. The idea of race is quite a new invention. And we see this happening here. In Spain, new categories are being created. And if we turn these four racial groups on their side, you'll see that it's a hierarchy. So over here, and this is 4, it's actually part of a painting of 16 racial groups. These are just 4. So what do we have here? Over here on the left, we see that the offspring of a Spaniard and an Indian is called a mestizo. So I'm gonna get my laser pointer. A Spaniard and a mestiza create a castizo. The child of an Indian and a mestiza creates a coyote. And the child of an Indian man and an African woman is a chino. By the late 1500s and into the 1600s, these racial categories, put them on their side. The closer you are to having peninsular ancestry, the higher you are on this racial hierarchy. And of course, at the bottom of this racial hierarchy is people with African descent, African ancestry. So these new categories are being created in this process. And part of what we're seeing in Spain and we're going to see in England is that unfree labor will come to be associated with categories that include people of African descent. Okay, gold, guns, no, that too. Gold, God, glory. Keep that in mind for Spain. How is England any different? Isn't the end result complete annihilation of indigenous societies for both? Yeah, it is. So again, we're not trying to say one is better or one is worse, but we're going to see, because England does not practice intermarriage, they have different forms of conquest rather than intermarriage and create these new categories. What we're going to see in England is that Native Americans are going to be pushed continually west for the rest of our course as English people take their place and take their land. So first, let's go to England. Let's go across the Atlantic. We want to understand the political, social, and economic situation in England so we can understand how and why English colonization developed and how it differed from Spain. There we go. Let's start with Henry, the Tudors. Everyone knows Henry VIII. He ruled from 1509 to 1547. You know him for his many wives. Henry VIII was first married to a woman named Catherine. a devout Christian, older than him. By all accounts, they had a very close and friendly marriage until Henry had his head turned by Anne Boleyn. Henry wants to marry Anne Boleyn. He wants out of his marriage to Catherine, but there's no divorce in the 1500s. The only way that he can marry Anne Boleyn is if the Pope himself, the head of the church, says that Henry's marriage to Catherine is annulled, like it never happened. So Henry writes to the Pope and he says, I want you to annul my marriage. The Pope says, no way. I like Catherine better than you. She's way more devout. You murdered one of my archbishops in a cathedral. I don't even like you. Henry, sick of vying for power from the Pope likes Spain a lot better than the Pope likes England. And he's looking for a way out of his marriage and of this relationship with the Pope. And he looks over at Germany and he says, hey, y'all are doing something interesting over here called the Protestant Reformation. This was a religious movement, a religious schism in Christianity after Martin Luther, as you know, nailed his 95 Theses, arguments against the Pope and church hierarchy. He nailed them to a church door. That was totally normal. That was like the message board. That's where you put information. If he was writing today, it would be on like his notepad app, and then he would put a picture of it up on Snapchat. I don't know what y'all use. So this movement in Germany creates an alternate Christian church or alternate Christian churches. So from 1517 on, when we talk about Christians, there's Catholics and Protestants. They're both Christians. They read mostly the same books, but this is going to create a schism in Europe and a schism in the New World. Henry looks at this as an opportunity to get out of his marriage and to get out under the thumb of the Pope. So he becomes a Protestant. So what? So the entire country becomes Protestant, because in the 1500s, your religion is whatever your religion is. So the entire country of England becomes Protestant. Henry marries Anne Boleyn, ends up unhappy with her, executes her to marry Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour dies. He marries Anne of Cleves, isn't happy with her, has her officially declared his sister to get out of that marriage. She's not his sister. Catherine Howard is next. She's executed. Catherine Parr finally outlives him. All of these marriages to all of these women produced a lot of children, but no surviving sons. So when Henry dies, that are sons of his wives, so quote legitimate. When Henry dies, then the crown first goes to his daughter Mary, Bloody Mary, not popular, and then to Mary's half-sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the daughter of Henry and Anne Boleyn. And Elizabeth is going to oversee this phenomenal expansion of England and this expansion of England into the New World. When we started our course in 1492, Spain is the powerhouse, the most wealthy, the best navy. The Spanish Armada is nigh unbeatable, and they have the closest relationship to the Pope. They are the powerhouse. This is going to change. England is going to take that place. When Queen Elizabeth comes to power, the King of Spain, King Philip, wants to marry her to consolidate his own power. She says, absolutely not. And they go to war. And she beats King Philip's armada. The English Navy beats the Spanish Armada in 1588. And of course, if you're Elizabeth, what are you going to do next? You're going to have a fabulous portrait of yourself painted to commemorate this event. And you're going to put on your ruff. You're going to put on your enormous silk sleeves. You're going to put on your cape, all your bows, dripping in pearls, because pearls are a signifier of virginity. She's not, but she never gets married. She holds on to her own power in part through refusing to marry. So you've just defeated the Spanish Armada back here. What's next? She's got her hand on the globe, specifically on the Americas. Spain's down, New World, you're next. Elizabeth ruled at a time when that great chain of being seemed to be disintegrating. The Pope had been dethroned in England. New wealth from the Americas promised social mobility to some, and the poor, up to a third of Elizabethan England, lived in poverty. The poor had lost traditional safety nets, including the Catholic parish's generosity and traditional common lands in England, which the wealthy had enclosed to create sheep farms. All of a sudden, that idea of a place for everything and everything in its place, the fact that peasants were being pushed off the land into cities meant being pushed out of their place. Suddenly, they were drifting over here on the sides. And English elites were alarmed at these so-called masterless men who poured into cities. Of course, it's masterless men and masterless women. Under Henry and Queen Elizabeth, the unemployed, this crisis of poverty, what was their response? They made a bunch of laws. The laws said that the unemployed could be whipped, branded, hanged, forced to labor. But oddly, punishing homeless and unemployed people did not actually solve the problem of poverty. So advocates of colonization said that North America could absorb England's surplus population of masterless men in this period of socioeconomic crisis and population growth. People are getting healthier at the same time. It's a recipe for disaster for the great chain of being. Elizabeth thinks that colonization will drain away these urban poor, and voluntary or involuntary emigration to the New World seemed to be an alternative that would benefit the poor and the English nation. Now, would these masterless men and women be sent to the New World to be their own masters? No. They would be sent there to be put back into their proper role, to be remastered as indentured servants for a period of 7 years. This English economic situation, it's not the same in Spain. Spain isn't experiencing this to the same extent. So England uniquely has all of this surplus population of impoverished people that Spain didn't. This is going to change the labor situation in the New World. What we're in England of indentured servants. So English settlers who can afford their own passage, they arrive as free persons and they get free land from the crown and from private companies like the Virginia Company. But in the 1600s, most English people arrived as indentured servants. They voluntarily surrendered their freedom for a period of time, often 5 to 7 years, in exchange for passage to America. During the period of indenture, they are unfree labor. But there are multiple types of unfree labor. An indenture, even though it's unfree, is not quite the same as slavery. You'll notice already there's a difference. They voluntarily gave up their freedom in exchange for passage. So they signed a contract. The contract says for the next 7 years, though, you are not free. They could be bought or sold to different masters. They could not marry without their owner's permission. So you're going to have to put off your idea of marriage and a family for 7 years. They were subject to physical punishments, including branding, whipping, even mutilation, like cutting off of ears. They could not refuse to work. They could not renegotiate their contract. They could not leave. Indentured women could have years added if they became pregnant, and some did face sexual abuse from their masters. Unlike enslavement, however, these indentured servants, if they survived, eventually became free and received freedom dues, which sometimes even included land for themselves. In the early 1600s, though, most of them didn't survive. Disease, attack from Native Americans, starvation took out most indentured servants in these early years. Emigration was risky. Why risk it? To get land. There's no land in England. It's up for grabs. It's all taken already. This is the only opportunity for these English poor that they will ever have to become their own master. And that's the goal, to become your own master through becoming an artisan or owning your own land. And there's no opportunity for that in England. There's opportunity in the New World. You might not survive 6 months, let alone 7 years. So we're already seeing a very different labor situation is going to develop. Now, the English will attempt to enslave Native Americans, most often those that were captured in warfare. Some of these Native Americans they shipped to the West Indies to be sold as slaves there. And the first people, the first Africans enslaved in the New World came to Virginia as early as 1619. But we're going to see a shift from the 1600s into the 1700s to racialized slavery of people of African descent in the British colonies. But as we see at the start, England also has this massive source of unfree labor in the form of indenture. Let's head to Virginia to look at colonization there before we come back to this topic of multiple forms of unfree labor and that shift to racialized slavery. We're going to focus on the first permanent English settlement, that is Jamestown in present day Virginia. So let's look at Virginia as an example of how this labor system worked and how the English almost immediately created a blueprint, conflict with Native Americans that led to a continual push of Native Americans west. This blueprint is going to continue for the rest of our course and beyond. The first permanent English settlement in the New World was Jamestown, founded in 1607 by the private company, the Virginia Company. They went to look for gold. They were like, oh man, the Spanish found so much gold and silver, let's go. There's no gold in Virginia. Nobody needs coal yet. There's nothing there to dig out of the ground that anybody needs at this time. This early colony then was plagued by internal divisions, a high death rate. They had almost no supplies for England. Their hopes of quick riches were quickly dashed. The first year, they were basically held together by the military discipline imposed by a former soldier, John Smith, which kept the colony running. But they hadn't brought farmers. They had brought second sons, men looking for wealth. This was not a colony that was going to be very good at feeding anybody. The ideas of Virginia that we see here in this image was a land of plenty, giant catfish. What is this? Is this a catfish? Giant something coming out of the Chesapeake. Birds are just falling out of the sky. I'm gonna grab this one, eat them up. This hunting and this fishing, that's an idea of Virginia that will develop as this land of plenty. But they first went there for gold and then they almost starved. From 1609 to 1610, 3/4 of the Jamestown settlement dies. Under siege from Algonquin-speaking Powhatan tribe, John Smith has become ill and temporarily returned to England. When he returns, when the Sea Venture, a ship from England, returned in 1610, there were only 60 colonists left alive. They had barricaded themselves in this fort under siege. We do have evidence that survival cannibalism took place. That is, they were not killing each other, but we do have evidence that remains were cannibalized. The starving time is absolutely no joke. These are the risks that indentured servants are going to look at this. They're going to hear about what happened in Jamestown, and some of them are still going to sign up to go there. So think about that balance of danger and possibility. Now, the area where the English established Jamestown was already inhabited by as many as 25,000 Algonquin-speaking people. Powhatan is the recognized leader of the Powhatan. Yes, the English just called the chief of the Powhatan, Powhatan. Pocahontas, also not her original name, that's the English name. And John Smith will eventually broker a peace between the Jamestown colony and the Powhatan. Now, you know the English, you know the Disney version. They dance with they sing with all the colors of the wind. I haven't listened to it in a while. In the Disney, John is about to be executed by Powhatan. Pocahontas, who's in love with him, throws herself over him and is like, no, father, don't kill him. I love him. This is a story that John Smith told. John Smith loved this story. He told it times about a bunch of different Native American women. So John Smith he was like, this just keeps happening to me. I keep almost being executed. Native American women save me because they're in love with me. The Pocahontas situation original story that he liked so much, he kept retelling it. And you're ready for me to say like, oh, that was total nonsense. Pocahontas is like 14. They're not in love. She marries another English guy named John Rolfe. Yeah, none of that is, all that Disney stuff is wrong. But anthropologists suggest to us that there may have been a ceremonial theatrical event whereby Powhatan asserted his authority, his rights, and he was to kill John, and Pocahontas, as the brokerage of peace between them, ceremonially prevented that death. That may have been a part of their alliance building. So something that looked a little bit like the Disney thing may have happened, but everyone there understood what was really happening is that Pocahontas is brokering a peace between Jamestown and her father. What happens next? There is a piece from 1614, an uneasy piece from 1614 to 1622. Like I said, Pocahontas marries John Rolfe. She goes to England herself and dies there in England in 1617. And that peace between the Powhatan and Jamestown does not survive after the chief of the Powhatan's death. His successor in 1622 immediately, his successor in 1622, now I'm going to go down here, ends that peace, attacks the settler population, destroys a quarter of, or kills a quarter of settlers. The Jamestown retaliates by massacring Native American villages. In 1644, the last major by the Powhatan killed 500 colonists, but ultimately ended in defeat of the Powhatan and a treaty that required that tribe to leave the area to go west. So by 1644, Jamestown has been, and the Eastern Virginia has been secured by English settlers. And we see here that blueprint that is going to be not intermarriage, but pushing Native Americans off their land to the west. Why? Why did they want the land so bad? There's no gold there. By the 1620s, they've given up on the dream of finding gold, and they've discovered that tobacco is worth its weight in gold. Native Americans teach the English to grow tobacco, and they discover that Europeans can't get enough of it. I'm gonna go back. I've got a better picture of Europeans can't get enough of tobacco. There we go. Europeans cannot get enough of tobacco. This is the first major cash crop in the Chesapeake region. Okay, so we're still in Virginia, and we're going to end with this crisis of Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia in 1676. So let's put this all together, and we're going to see how multiple issues come to a head. Conflict with Native Americans, a labor system based on multiple types of unfree labor, and that English hunger for land. Like I said, why the lands? There's none available in England, and in Virginia, you can grow tobacco and become extremely wealthy. And in the early years of these tobacco plantations, the plantations are worked by multiple types of free laborers. We hear that the tobacco plantations are worked by indentured whites, some indentured Black Virginians alongside enslaved Virginians of African descent. But the math, the arithmetic of indenture is changing. Let's think about this in the cold mathematics of unfree labor. If you're a wealthy Virginian, the more people that you bring over, the more land you get from the crown. So if you bring over a dozen indentures, you're going to get that much more land. Yeah, at the end, you have to give them money or some land, but you only have to do that if they survive. And in the early years, in the 1620s and 30s, they're not surviving. Most indentures die. So why would you spend more money to enslave someone that you might buy from the West, in the West Indies, go from Africa to the slave pens of the West Indies and up to Virginia? But that's expensive. And why would you do that if your indentures and people that you've enslaved are all going to die within 2 years? Indentures are cheaper. But by the 1640s and the 1650s, People are living longer. Indentures are surviving, and indentured servants who survive have become troublesome. By 1676, our masterless men are becoming a problem. They are living to the end of their indenture and demanding their price and their land. But by 1676, all the good land in Virginia has already been taken. The only land that indentures can secure is on the frontier. A quarter of free people in Virginia by 1676 have no land at all. They pay high taxes, but they can't vote because they're not landowners. Terms of service for people who are still indentured keep getting longer and longer as well. So this is a volatile social situation in 1676 between the multiple forms of unfree labor in England, or excuse me, in Virginia, and the Virginia elite who are becoming fabulously wealthy as a result of these tobacco plantations. Who's in charge of all of this? Well, the king, the crown, but he's not around. Virginia is governed by Governor Berkeley, who is put into place by the crown. Lost my place. No, I'm back. One of the things that historians are interested in about Bacon's rebellion is that in many ways, it's a precursor to the revolution. We're going to see people unhappy with the way that their society is run, overthrow an unpopular governor who's really standing in for the crown here. The Governor Berkeley rules with an iron fist. There is an elected assembly. This is another way that we're going to look at Virginia as a precursor to our Constitution. The House of Burgesses is an elected assembly elected by freeholders. But the real power in Virginia is the Governor's Council. The Governor's Council is full of men who are appointed by Berkeley, his friends, men like Colonel John West, his closest friend and best ally. And what is the House of Burgesses that council controlling? Well, they're making sure that they keep all of the best land, and they are allying with the Pamunkey tribe and their chief, a woman named Kokokeski, to control a very lucrative beaver trade in Virginia. So the Governor's Council makes sure that his friends keep all that good land, and they're the ones becoming wealthy from the beaver trade as well. Kokokeski is an ally of Berkeley because it benefits her. It benefits her to ally with Berkeley, to work on this beaver trade, and to fight against her enemies like the Doeg tribe. So she's built an alliance with Berkeley because she's got her own stuff going on. This is something we want to keep remembering. Indigenous people have their own political and economic situation they're dealing with. And we're going to see this over and over again in these early years, that Native Americans are going to ally themselves with various European powers to try and play them off of each other for their own ends. Ultimately, it's not going to be successful, but it's successful for Kokokeski. Also notice that in her information over here that we know, she has a son named John West. Yeah, his father is probably Colonel John West. She's not married to Colonel John West, but everyone knows that her half-white son is John West's son. Into this mix comes Berkeley's cousin, Nathaniel Bacon. Bacon is one of those second sons in England. He's a raised wealthy, educated at Oxbridge, but there's no land for him. His older brother is going to get everything, and he's just lost a lawsuit trying to get a piece of land in England. So in 1675, he shows up in Virginia. He trusts that his cousin is going to take care of him. And his Governor Berkeley does immediately put him on the Governor's Council. Yeah, come on in. You're in my elite circle. But give him a good plantation. They're all taken. He puts Bacon out on the frontier, which is pretty, Virginia's not that big. He puts him out on the frontier. And out on the frontier, Bacon's plantation is attacked and his overseer is murdered. In response and in retaliation from this Doeg attack, so the Doegs have attacked Nathaniel Bacon's plantation, in retaliation, he attacks the Pamunkey. He attacks Kokokeski's tribe. And Kokokeski, you can imagine, is like, Governor Berkeley, you have to do something about your cousin. Why is he attacking me? We're your friends. It's the dough eggs that are your foes. But Nathaniel Bacon says, no, I'm friend or foe, Native American, all the same to me. They're all heathens, and the governor protects them instead of giving us their land. Now, the governor is unpopular for lots of reasons. And ex-indentures who have gotten bad land, indentures who are having their contracts extended, enslaved Virginians who want to be free, wealthy Virginians who are not in that governor's council, so they're still not getting the cream of the crop. All of them are like, yeah, there's something wrong here. They all have their own agendas and their own interests, but all of it hinges on this idea that all Native Americans are the enemy of the English and that they should all be pushed further west. Berkeley says, no way. It's my policy and the policy of the crown that we ally with some tribes against others. But because of this widespread discontent, Nathaniel Bacon creates Nathaniel Bacon, after being booted from the governor's council because of what he did, he's elected into the House of Burgesses, that elected assembly. And there he amasses a militia of fellow wealthy men who are not in the governor's circle, but also indentures, ex-indentures, even some enslaved Virginians join for their own reason. Now, Bacon isn't saying, I'm going to end slavery, I'm going to end indenture. He's just saying, let's push these Native Americans out and let's get Berkeley out of here. But these other groups see that as an opportunity to get their own results. His militia occupies Jamestown in 1676, but then Bacon dies of dysentery, and the primary sources say that his guts turned themselves inside out. It was a very unpleasant death, and the militia falls apart afterwards. As I said, in many ways, this is a precursor to our own revolution and a precursor to our Constitution when we look at the House of Burgesses and that elected assembly, and how many colonists are going to say, hey, our elected assemblies should have more power than governors or even the crown. Now, the governor is put there by the crown, so one and the same there. But historians are also interested in the way that Bacon's rebellion is one of those hinging moments of changing from indentured servitude to racialized slavery. It's not overnight. There's still indentures coming in. England still has plenty of poor people, but we're going to see increasingly laws and customs in the South and in Virginia are going to shift to racialized slavery. One of the men who may have participated in Bacon's rebellion, a man named John Punch, we're going to see him again in Module 4. He was originally an indentured servant, and he and two other indentures who were white ran away from Virginia in 1640 and were captured in Maryland. All three were captured. The two white indentured servants were given time added. They had years added to their contract, but John Punch, his punishment was lifelong enslavement. Oh my gosh, sorry. His punishment was he was permanently enslaved. So as early as 1640, we're already seeing that there are different laws in Virginia applying to white people and Black people, people of African descent. We're going to see that accelerate after Bacon's rebellion, when indentures just seem to be too much trouble for our Virginia elites. So you've got a little bit of work to do, but just a little bit, the Module 2 exit exam, and then I will see you back here in Module 3. And yes, John Punch may be an ancestor of President Obama on his mother's side. See you in Module 3. Have a great one.